Okay, this is the second session of what we call the roots of war. And in this session, we're going to explore the real war and what's really behind all this. And we realize that we're on the threshold in a number of areas of what could be a nuclear war. In the Middle East, of course, and a number of other players. And to really get a perception of all of this, we need to take a quick look at Daniel chapter 10. It's one of those strange passages in the Bible in which we get a peek behind the veil. What's really going on behind world events? Because in Daniel chapter 10, Daniel undertakes a fast for 21 days. He often did a period of time of prayer and fasting. In this case, he fasts for 21 days. And he gets visited by a very major angel. But this angel has a very strange message. He happens to mention to Daniel that he was dispatched 21 days ago. Apparently, when Daniel started his fast, this angel was sent to give him a message. But he has been fighting for 21 days to get through. He has been withstood by some kind of spirit being that he calls the Prince of the Kingdom of Persia. Now, don't be confused. That's not a literal prince that we might be able to see, touch, and feel. It's an expression of a spirit being that somehow is a power behind the Kingdom of Persia. And apparently what's going on here is this angel, Daniel 10, is an introduction to 3 chapters. Because the next 2 chapters, chapters 11 and 12, are the climax of the book of Daniel. The first 6 chapters of Daniel are narrative, and the last 6 are prophecies. But Daniel 10, 11, 12 is the climax of the book. Daniel 10 is this introduction where this angel says, by the way, when you started praying, I was sent for 21 days ago. It took me 21 days to get through. In fact, I couldn't get through until I was assisted by Michael, the chief prince. Michael is an archangel. He's always on a military mission to the benefit of Israel. And he goes on, he says, after I give you what my message I'm going to give you, I've got to go back and fight with another guy. I've got to deal with the prince of the power of Greece. And this is all we know. It's just a glimpse. But it clearly portrays the notion that behind these major world empires is spiritual combat going on between the forces of darkness and God's direct forces. And there are a number of places in the Scripture we get a glimpse of this. There's an incident with Elisha and his servant in 2 Kings 6 and so forth. I won't take the time here, but there is a dark side. What we easily forget as we read the daily news and as we watch the 10 o'clock news, or as we try to study the various struggles politically on the planet Earth, it's easy for us to forget what the Bible gives us this insight, that behind the scenes there's warfare that we don't understand. When did that war first get declared? In Genesis chapter 3. Do you remember when the Satan deceived Eve and got Adam also to fall? God declares war on the Nachash, the shining one, that of course becomes the serpent. Genesis 3:15 is a landmark verse where God says to the serpent, I'll put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. And we all know this verse because it's the beginning of a chain that I sometimes call the scarlet thread that climaxes at the cross, except it actually goes beyond that. This is the promise of a redeemer, a kinsman redeemer. This is the first in the chain that promises the Messiah. In fact, it's the verse that gives us one of the titles of the Messiah, the seed of the woman, which is a contradiction in biology as well as grammar. The seed is the man, not the woman. But this is a hint of the virgin birth. And we all talk about the seed of the woman as the title of the Messiah, but we often overlook there's 2 seeds in this verse. There's also the seed of the Nachash, the seed of the serpent, the seed of Satan. And the seed of the woman is summarized for you, by the way, in Revelation 12. Revelation 12 is one of those parenthetical passages that summarize all this. Well, from this day on, Genesis 3 on, Satan is trying to thwart the plan of God. We can look at the whole biblical panorama as a series of events where Satan tries to thwart the plan of God. In Genesis 6, his fallen angels try to create a hybrid race that corrupts the human seed. And it got so prevalent that God picks Noah and his 3 sons and their wives and erases the rest of the blackboard in the flood of Noah. Very important to understand that. Abraham's seed in Genesis 12 and 20 under attack. The famine in Genesis 50. The destruction of the male Hebrews by Pharaoh in Exodus 1 is satanic attempt to wipe out God's plan. Even after Pharaoh lets them go after the death of the firstborn, he sends his army after them to wipe them out. You all know the story. What many people don't realize is that in Genesis 15, when God tells Abraham that his descendants are going to go away, but they're going to come back after 400 years to populate the land of Canaan. You all know the Genesis 15. Realize what that did for Satan. Satan now has 4 centuries to lay down a minefield. And again, we have Rephaim in the which are equivalent to the Nephilim throughout. You won't understand much of the Old Testament if you don't understand that the Rephaim, these certain tribes, there are 4 different tribes named, are Nephilim, hybrids. And yes, they're giants, but that's not the key point. When Moses sends the 12 spies into the land, 10 come back with evil report. They were terrified. Why? There were Nephilim in the land. And they were terrified, understandably. And when you get, and of course, Joshua, after Moses dies, Joshua conquers the land of Canaan. And you all know the story of Joshua. What you may not realize is God told Joshua to wipe out every man, woman, and child of certain tribes, to deal aggressively with their enemies. And his successors didn't do that. They didn't finish the mop-up. They didn't clean it up. That's what the book of Judges is all about. It's interesting if you look at the land of Israel and you look at the strongholds that they failed to deal with. There's some in the Golan, at Jenin, Nablus, Ramallah. In fact, their capital was Jericho. Bet Yarah is the house of the moon god. The moon worship didn't start with Allah. And of course, Gaza. These are the places that were prominent in the book of Judges. And how interesting it is that these strongholds are the territories that remain in dispute to this very day. Isn't that interesting? So when you hear about Jenin and Nablus and Ramallah and Jericho itself and Gaza and the Golan, realize that the roots go back to the book of Judges and earlier. So as God goes on through the Bible and reveals his plan, it allows Satan to focus his attacks. In 2 Samuel 7, we know that the Messiah is going to come from the house of David. Well, then Satan can focus on the house of David. Jehoram kills his brothers. Abraham slew all the heirs to the throne. Except in each one of these stories, there's always one that gets escaped. Some servant takes a baby and hides it. God always is outsmarting him. Athaliah kills all but Joash gets saved, and Hezekiah is assaulted. We even get to Jeremiah 22, where God is so upset with the sin of the royal line, he pronounces a blood curse on the royal line. You think Satan must have had a field day that day. Boy, God shot himself in the foot. You wonder, how can he get the Messiah's going to come from the royal line, and yet now there's a blood curse on the royal line. And I always visualize God turning to the angels saying, watch this one. When you get to the New Testament, you discover that there is a genealogy, a Jewish genealogy of Matthew that starts from Abraham, as any Jew would, and goes right down to Joseph, the legal father of Jesus, but not heir to the blood curse, because there was no blood connection. Luke, being a doctor, he starts with Adam, and he tracks it. When he gets to Abraham, from Abraham to David, they're identical. But when Luke gets to David, he doesn't follow Matthew's path. Matthew went through the first surviving son of Bathsheba down through Solomon to Joseph. But Luke goes through the second surviving son of Bathsheba, Nathan, and goes down through Heli, the father of Mary. And if you understand your Torah and the daughters of Zelophehad and the details, and you read the Greek carefully in Luke 3:23, that Joseph, the husband of Mary, was the son-in-law of Heli. Numizo in the Greek. It's reckoned by law. But anyway, God's always outsmarting Satan's thwarts, of course. When we get to the Persian Empire, you've got this would-be Hitler called Haman, who plots to wipe out all the Jews in the Persian Empire. If he succeeded, there would have been no temple built, and so forth. There's a lot of implications. And of course, through Esther and the whole book of Esther, that is thwarted. In the New Testament, Joseph's fears with Mary being pregnant, Herod's attempts to wipe out the babies in Bethlehem, even at Nazareth, when they try to throw Jesus off a cliff. In Mark 4 and Luke 8, the two storms at sea, I believe, were supernatural. That's why he rebuked the sea and so forth. And of course, the ultimate thing, the cross itself. But there's more to it than that. Revelation 12 summarizes all this. But Satan's not through yet. We need to understand that. Let's talk a little bit about the monarchy. One of the great milestones that's at issue here, really, whether they realize it or not, is the monarchy. Obviously, after Judges comes Samuel, and then, of course, Saul, the first king. That's all in 1 Samuel. Then we have David established in 2 Samuel. David is the most ultimate monarchy ever established on the planet Earth. We need to understand that. Then Solomon, of course, then there was the civil war, and the northern kingdom spins off into idolatry, southern kingdom, Judah. And God sends Elijah and then Elisha to the northern kingdom, but no avail. They won't turn around, so the Assyrians are called by God to exterminate them. The northern kingdom becomes extinct. No, there are no 10 lost tribes. The tribes didn't get lost. They migrated. Faithful had migrated south anyway. But that's a whole other story. The southern kingdom of Judah goes from bad to worse. A few good kings in there, but finally goes to the Babylonian exile. And this is all, of course, summarized in 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Now, during the Babylonian Empire, Daniel, of course, is taken as a hostage to assure the loyalty of the vassal king Nebuchadnezzar puts up. But anyway, Nebuchadnezzar, as he takes over, has a strange dream that's very important to us for lots of reasons. The head of gold, the belly and chest of silver, the arms and chest of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, the legs of iron, iron mixed with clay. A strange dream, because a stone cut without hands strikes it at the face, wipes it out, and that stone grows to be a mountain that fills the whole earth. Notice this, it fills the whole earth. And that mountain is a prophetic idiom for an empire. It's used that way many times in Scripture. In this case, it's the ultimate empire that emerges from the ultimate monarchy. Now, in Daniel 2, of course, we've been through that. Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, we talked about that in the previous session. And, of course, obviously, Rome is in 2 phases. We talked about that. In Daniel 7, Daniel is directly given a series of visions that different idioms are used in the vision, but the same material. Babylon's a winged lion, Persia is a bear on one side, Greece a leopard, and then this terrible beast that doesn't even have an analogy at the end, which grows 10 heads and so forth. And you'll notice that when in Revelation 13, these are listed in inverse order because it's going back through time as he talks about it. And understand that the beast in Revelation 13 comes out of the eastern leg of the Byzantine Empire, or the Roman Empire. It's not necessarily a Western situation at all. But finally, after the Babylonian Empire, of course, Cyrus takes over. He authorized the return to the land, which is chronicled in Ezra. Then Artaxerxes authorized the rebuilding of Jerusalem, which is the key thing in Nehemiah. Then we have the so-called silent years, where both the kings of the north and kings of the south are profiled in advance in the book in Daniel 11. It's very important to understand because it sets the stage for the Antichrist. But after the Persians, of course, come the Greeks and then the Romans. Now, the Greeks position the world for Christ by introducing a singular language that's the most scientifically precise language on the planet Earth, the Greek. How indebted we are, not only for the New Testament, but the Old Testament translation of the Greek that was done 3 centuries before the Gospel period. Priceless to us. Rome comes along and sets up the laws, the stability, the infrastructure, and the roads so the gospel has the opportunity to spread quickly in its early fragile years. And of course, also given to Daniel this incredible vision of the 69 weeks where it predicts the exact day that the Mashiach Nagid, the Messiah, the King, would present himself to Jerusalem riding a donkey. And we know right to the exact day. And again, that's in the Septuagint, translated into Greek 300 years before the gospel period. An incredible proof of the deity of Christ and the authority and validity of the biblical record. But as Jesus comes riding that donkey, he also makes a very important announcement. He says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem," in Matthew 23, the last few verses. "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them which are sent to thee. how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathers her chickens under her wings. In that sentence, or clause, Jesus highlights the purpose of all history. How often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathers her chickens under her wings? That's God's dream. That's what he was for. Then we encounter, his next clause is the tragedy of all history, and ye would not. 300 details specified in the Old Testament for his first coming. He fulfilled them all. Every detail of his life, his genealogy, and I won't go through the whole list, it's incredible. And still, they rejected him, the tragedy of all history. And as a result, he says, behold, your house is now left to you desolate. And indeed it has been. But then he gives us the triumph of all history. He says, I say unto you, ye shall not see me henceforth, until ye shall say, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. You'll discover when you study Hosea 5:15, and we'll get into that in a minute, that there is a prerequisite condition of the second coming of Christ. They have to ask him. They have to repent and ask him. Now, it's interesting, Jesus also, in the Luke account, emphasizes, he said, saying, if thou hadst known, even thou at least in this thy day, the things which belong to thy peace. He held them accountable to know Daniel's prophecy. But now they are hidden from thine eyes. They are blinded. Jesus declares it here in Luke 19:42. Are they blinded forever? No, of course not. Paul tells us that they are in Romans 11:25. For I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part is happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. Don't confuse the fullness of the Gentiles with the times of the Gentiles. Until the fullness, that's a term of the church. Till the fullness of the Gentiles be come in, and the church is caught up. Then their blindness will be relieved. If we look at a timeline, this timeline is extracted from our Learn the Bible in 24 Hours. You're probably familiar with it. Creation, fall of man, right on through the Exodus, and of course the birth of Christ. Church, of course, is from the nation of Israel is you get the diaspora starts, the church is founded, and Israel will be restored, and then the church is pulled out. And we call a synonym for the church is the fullness of the Gentiles, when the number is full. And then comes the tribulation and so on. The times of the Gentiles is also a phrase used in Luke that speaks of Nebuchadnezzar to the Antichrist, the times of Gentile dominion on the planet Earth, a different phrase altogether. And obviously it will end when Jesus comes and sets up his own kingdom on the planet Earth. Now we're in this very interesting period after the restoration of Israel and prior to the conclusion of the church. What a fascinating period of time to be alive. This little interval that's characterized by verse 26 of the famous 70-week prophecy. Verse 25 dealt with the 69 weeks, the exact day that Jesus presented himself as a king. Verse 27 will talk about this peculiar 7-year period at the climax. We're in verse 26, which is the interval in which Christ was crucified, the city and the sanctuary were destroyed, and a lot of other things happen, but it will come. Now it's interesting that God in Hosea chapter 5, last verse, makes a strange remark. In Hosea 5:15, he says, I will go and return to my place. That's a pretty weird thing for God to say. How can God return unless he left? And of course, Jesus left heaven to be on the earth to fulfill his mission on your behalf and mine. And you realize that Christ's crucifixion was not a tragedy, it was an achievement. It was a fulfillment of the purpose for which he came. But he says, I will go and return to my place until they acknowledge their offense and seek my face. Acknowledge their offense, that's singular and specific. It's Israel's rejection of the Messiah. Till they acknowledge their offense and seek my face, in their affliction they will seek me earnestly. That's, of course, an allusion to the Great Tribulation. That's the purpose of the Great Tribulation. Anyone who thinks that the church goes through the Great Tribulation has a problem in ecclesiology, not just eschatology. We need to understand the mystical nature of the church. You have to understand the purpose of the tribulation. It has a very specific purpose. It has nothing to do with the church. It has to do with Israel. They're mutually exclusive. Now, something else is worth mentioning, of course, is that the Babylonian captivity started with 3 different sieges. The first siege started the era called the servitude of the nation. It ends with the decree of Cyrus that we talked about previously. There's also a period called the desolations of Jerusalem. Started with the 3rd siege because they didn't knuckle under, Nebuchadnezzar finally takes a final siege and levels the place. That starts a period of the desolations of Jerusalem that ends with the decree of Artaxerxes on Germanus, when he allows it to be rebuilt. Both the servitude and the desolations are 70-year periods to the very day, and many scholars confuse them, think they're coterminous. No, they overlap, but they're both 70 years to the day. The decree of Artaxerxes, of course, we encounter, it's the one that triggers the 70 weeks of Daniel. But there's a strange hint of 2,520-year period in Ezekiel chapter 4, which we won't go through the details of, but what on earth do we do the 2,520 years? Well, if you take it from the servitude of the nation, interestingly, it comes out to be May 14th of 48, which is the restoration of the nation of Israel. You take that same period of time from the desolations of Jerusalem, you come to the restoration of Jerusalem on June 7th of 1967. Astonishing. That may be, it's a somewhat conjectural application, but it is provocative. It's too provocative to ignore. Well, let's focus now on Israel itself. I think we understand where it is pretty well. We also understand that there are parts of it that are still under dispute, the subject of every daily's newspaper. And Israel, of course, has well recognized its flag. It was officially adopted when the country was created in 48, but it had previously been introduced in 1891 to represent the Zionist movement. And of course, the six-pointed Star of David is an earlier Jewish symbol. It's quite debatable how far it does go back. The blue and white stripes, of course, are intended to reflect the design of the traditional Jewish prayer shawls. Well, the regathering begins. It's typically measured from 1860, when they first started putting neighborhoods outside the city walls, the famous windmill at Mishkanot Sha'anim that you visit Israel, Jerusalem earmarks. But in 1881, there were widespread pogroms in Russia. And the positive side of that was it awakened a Jewish national consciousness. And in 1894, a journalist by the name of Theodor Herzl was attending the trial of Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish officer that was being railroaded in a scandal in Paris. But it was a very public trial and very virulent anti-Semitism everywhere. And of course, a very contrived case against him. He ultimately later will be cleared after much agony. But it primarily impressed Herzl so deeply, he realized during that experience that a Jew will never have peace until he has a homeland of his own. And so in 2 years, he publishes a book, Der Judenstaat, that is the Jewish state, was published. And he also, next year, convenes the first Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland, and that's also regarded by many as the launching pad of Zionism, and the state from which Israel comes. Now, remember I mentioned 1916, there was the Sykes-Picot Agreement signed by Britain, France, and Russia, and that secret wartime agreement, and of course, dividing up the Ottoman Empire after the war. Among its terms was the establishment of an Arab state in, quote, southern Palestine. Now, the word Palestine was a label put on that region by the Romans when they wanted to identify it with Israel's enemies, which were the Philistines. The word Palestine is simply the Latin equivalent for Philistines. But anyway, the Arabs discovered this secret agreement and were incensed that Britain had decided to engineer its own rule over Palestine through the League of Nations. And of course, they did rule Palestine as virtually a colony until 1948 when it ended. The next year, the Balfour Declaration gets signed. A short note from the British Foreign Secretary, A.J. Balfour, to Lord Rothschild, one of Britain's most prominent Jews, stated, quote, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Little short note, but it, of course, becomes a major, major impact. This declaration accelerated the Jewish immigration to the Holy Land, and it's regarded as a formative national document by the Israelis. Now, together with the Sykes-Picot Agreement, laid the foundation for the current conflict in the Middle East. And in 1919, interesting thing, at the Versailles Peace Conference, Wilson argues for self-determination of all peoples. There was a Jewish-Arab accord attempted where the Jews claimed a Jewish home in Palestine. The Arabs claim an Arab state from Iraq to Yemen. What's fascinating about this, if you study it, they didn't even claim Palestine in those days. Then we get to 1920, the San Remo Conference. It granted Britain a mandate over Palestine, and with the aim at encouraging and settling Jews and establishing a Jewish home. That was the objective. But the Brits, for their own reasons, encouraged Arab riots in Palestine, and the rioters demand an end to Jewish immigration and the incorporation of Palestine into Syria at that time. And this, of course, has Satan behind it all. In 1921, the British decide to install Abdullah in Transjordan, and also Samuel, the British potentate in the area, appoints Hajj Amin al-Husseini the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. It's inexcusable. He picked the most virulent anti-Jewish Arab he could find to put in charge. Vicious, nasty, virulent thing to do. Well, the League of Nations in 22 officially ratifies the British mandate over Palestine with an aim of building a Jewish national home. That was the mandate. And Churchill creates this white paper, which created Transjordan, east of the Jordan River. It took 78% of the land allocated for British mandate. He peels that off to accomplish his Transjordan intrigue. In 1929, there's Arab riots in Palestine, massacre of Jews in Hebron and Safed. And, of course, the Arabs continue to demand an end to Jewish immigration. In 1930, the British does a white paper which limits Jewish immigration to Palestine. What on earth? I thought that's what they're supposed to encourage. Of course, 1933, Hitler comes to power in Germany. Then we have the Nuremberg laws. We can comment on that. 1935, signed by Adolf Hitler after one of his infamous mass rallies. The laws provided the legal framework for stripping the Jews of their rights as human beings, far beyond any political issues. The first of these was titled Law for Safeguarding German Blood and Honor. These laws and their successors paved the way for deporting Jews and ultimately the death camps of the Holocaust. The impact, of course, was the murder of 6 million European Jews and the inability of the survivors to even return home, even after Germany was defeated in 1945. But all of this, of course, rallies worldwide support for a Jewish state in Palestine. Many people would argue that without the Holocaust, there might not have been a Jewish state. There was a mood at the time that was favorable to that. It's astonishing to see how short memories are. The same kind of Nazism that was virulent in the 30s is in Europe today again. Astonishing. Well, in 1936 to 39, the campaign of Arab violence continues. Nothing new. Arab rioters murder 500 Jews and thousands of Arabs. You know, these riots kill more Arabs than Jews. There are Arabs that are trying to remain moderate, and the extremist Arabs won't let them. Yasser Arafat has murdered more Arabs than Jews. If you're an Arab in that area trying to be moderate, your life's in danger. And again, they're trying to stop immigration and so forth. And they also the Arabs throw their support to Hitler, predictably. In 1937, the British Peel Commission asserts that the Jewish national home cannot be built in Palestine. It recommends the repartition of Palestine into a tiny Jewish state, 5% of the total area, and an Arab state in the remainder. What's amazing is the Peel plan is rejected by the Arabs, both the Jews and the Arabs. Britain halts immigration to Palestine, condemning millions of Jews to the Holocaust. Britain's hands have the blood of the Holocaust on their fingers too. In 1938, there's the Munich Conference, and what I'd like to do is leave our timeline for a moment to insert a case study of Czechoslovakia. You say, what on earth has that got to do with Israel? Absolutely nothing, and yet everything. I'd like to take a look at what they call the rape of Czechoslovakia. I want you to understand the methodology here. It's a case study. You know, Hegel said, history teaches us that man learns nothing from history. Santayana said it another way. He says, if man doesn't know history, he's destined to repeat it. The Czechoslovakia was a country that had a very strategic barrier from its adversaries. It had, first of all, 800,000 well-trained army regulars. It had a highly efficient arms industry. And it was also protected by the Sudeten Mountains, mountainous regions that were well fortified, protecting the heartland and the capital. Their fortifications were regarded as impregnable. There are documents from the German General Staff in which their assessment was there's no way that the German army was ready or willing to attack militarily Czechoslovakia. So what did they do? Oh, and by the way, on top of that, they had treaty protection from the Western powers. France at that time had 100 divisions, and it was larger than Germany. And Britain and Russia were also guarantors of Czechoslovakia's borders. You get the picture? You think they're solid? Not so. There's a propaganda solution invented about the Sudetenland. It's a region that had about 3 million Germans and about 7 million others. There were Germans there, they were a minority. Czechoslovakia is a prosperous democracy. All these people, including the Germans, enjoyed full civil rights. But what Hitler does, he establishes a puppet political leadership, an underground. He organizes the Sudeten Free Corps, and he fabricates terror against the Sudeten Germans, and makes it look like the Czechs are picking on the German minorities. And of course, the propaganda machine fans how unjust these Sudeten Germans are being treated. William Scherer, who wrote the book The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, an interesting quote, I'll just extract some things. He says, thus the plight of the German minority in Czechoslovakia was merely a pretext for cooking up a stew in a land he coveted, undermining it, confusing and misleading its friends, and concealing it through a purpose to destroy the Czechoslovak state and grab its territories. The leaders of France and Great Britain did not grasp this. All through the spring and summer, indeed almost to the end, Prime Minister Chamberlain and Premier Daladier apparently sincerely believed, along with most of the rest of the world, that all Hitler wanted was justice for his kinsfolk in Czechoslovakia. Really. Then we have the reversal of causality. Very interesting process. See, the media and the propaganda treated the intransigent Czechs as they were the obstacle to peace, because they wouldn't agree to giving up this land. It was the Czechs that were precipitating a crisis to prevent the breakup of their state. The choice between war and peace was in their hands. What? Yeah, well, the Czechoslovakia, they're the bad guys. This petty segment of Europe is harassing the human race. The Western powers should force the Czechs to relinquish their, guess this, occupied territories. Occupied by whom? By themselves. Come on. They're manufacturing a point of view. 1937, 1938, the Czechs are pressured by leading Western powers to meet the Sudeten demands. The Western press laments the Czechoslovak disregard for all peace in Europe, injustice for allowing the Sudetenland to be returned, or not allowing it to be returned to Germany. The British envoy demands that Czech remodel its foreign relations to assure freedom from aggressive action against her neighbors. It's as if they're fearful that Czech's going to attack other people. That's never been an issue. Land for peace. September 18, 1938, the British and French determine the Czechs must accede to Hitler's demands, you see, for the peace of Europe, for the maintenance of peace and safety of Czechoslovakia's vital interest. What are you talking about? Their vital interest is to protect themselves. And get this, this is important. The British and the French guarantee their new boundaries. Give up this land and we'll guarantee your protection. They're going to exchange the land and their fortifications and their industrial heartland in exchange for paper promises. Otherwise, they don't agree to this, they're going to have to fight Hitler alone. It's up, Neville Chamberlain said, it's up to the Czechs now. See, they've made the Czechs the bad guys. Do you see a parallel brewing here? That's why I'm getting into this. Then the sting, what I call the sting. Hysteria mounts, shuttle diplomacy increases. Minutes before the September 28 deadline, Hitler agrees to Chamberlain's proposal for a peace conference, the Munich Conference. Britain and France plead with Hitler for 11 hours to take the Sudetenland peaceably. And he finally, reluctantly, agrees. Can you imagine? Chamberlain and Daladier are praised, cheered, and thanked as they return home for having traded land for peace. That's where he made his famous remark, "My friends, I believe it is peace in our time." And boy, that came back to haunt him. The Prime Minister of Czechoslovakia said it differently. He says, "We've been basely betrayed." You know, 1 Thessalonians 5:3 says, "When they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them." So let's go to phase 2. September 30, 1938, the Czech army withdraws from the Sudetenland. German annexation follows, but also what follows are more demands. The violence and oppression doesn't stop, continues. March 15, 1939, less than 6 months, the Nazi war machine rolls through the rest of Czechoslovakia. the Western powers did nothing. Their assurances proved worthless. Now, Israel is just a little democracy with a powerful army and a defensive terrain. Direct seizure would be unthinkable. Pressure from the West is achievable. The reversal of causality is astonishingly effective through a managed press and an illiterate electorate. Munich Conference, 1938, Hitler's given the Sudetenland. 1939, he overruns Czechoslovakia. The Chamberlain White Paper announces the end to the Jewish national home and promises control of immigration to Palestine to the Arabs within 5 years. The British blockade Palestine against what they call illegal Jewish immigration. And then, of course, Hitler invades Poland, and World War II begins. Astonishing injustice, astonishing ignorance on the part of the leadership, astonishing manageability by an illiterate electorate. And that's not just then, it's now. Look at the foolishness, the nonsense that's promoted in the Western press over Israel and the Arabs, and the lies and the deceit and the fiction that's treated as fact. Anyway, in 1941, the Mufti that was appointed by Samuel relocates to Berlin. He meets with Hitler, announces the intention of creating a fascist Arab state, and agitates the destruction of world Jewry. He instigates terrorism against the Arab moderates also. Notice that, instigates terrorism against the Arab moderates also. In 1942, the Nazi conference at Wannsee decides on the destruction of all the Jews in Europe. By the way, in 1944, the Jewish Brigade is part of the British forces and fights alongside the Allies. That often gets forgotten. 1945, World War II ends. We have the liberation, of course, of the death camps. Arabs demand an end to Jewish immigration to Palestine. And now the Jews are starting to turn against the British because they're obstructing the objectives of their own mandate. And so it gets more and more tense. So the British in 1947 announced their withdrawal from Palestine. The United Nations announces a partition into Jewish and Arab states. And Britain acceded to Resolution 181 of the newly founded United Nations, which called for a partition of British ruled Palestine into separate states. Jerusalem will be a separate entity administered by the United Nations. The Palestinian Jews approved the plan. Guess who turned it down? The Arabs. It wasn't enough. Abba Eban said it so well. The Arabs never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And tension, of course, turns to violence, and Britain prepares to withdraw. And of course, 1948, the Arab forces, are aimed at preventing the establishment of the state. The Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel. David Ben-Gurion, using his Ezekiel as his authority, announces on international radio the name of the new Jewish homeland is Israel. Major milestone for anyone that has any biblical awareness at all. And the British mandate expires. Jewish leaders declared it as an Israel state. The U.S., and interesting enough, the USSR recognized it quickly. But of course, the Palestinian Arabs, joined by 5 neighboring Arab states, launch a war that Israel, of course, ultimately wins. 700,000 Palestinian Arabs voluntarily fled their own lands, assuming they'd be absorbed by their homelands, or in hopeful of winning, but even if not winning, they assumed they would have been absorbed by their neighbors. So by the end of the war, Israel had expanded its borders. Egypt had occupied the Gaza Strip, and Jordan had occupied the West Bank and East Jerusalem, including the Old City. And the huge population of Palestinian Arabs that fled would ultimately become radicals because they will be confined to the squalor of the refugee camps. In 1948 to 1949, of course, Israel's War of Independence. 5 countries invade Israel. And so that's where we lose the Old City, the East Jerusalem, and so forth. From 1948 to 1952, 800,000 Jews are expelled from Arab countries, most flee to Israel, of course, and are absorbed. 650,000 Arabs flee from Israel and are confined, not absorbed, confined to refugee camps in those areas. And 1951, Yasser Arafat of the Husseini clan begins organizing the Palestinian radicals in Cairo and recruits a handful of guys, future leaders. And they actually they go to Jordan, get thrown out in Jordan with Black September 1970 by King Hussein of Jordan. They were going broke in Tripoli until Clinton reestablishes them. 1952 to 56, we have terrorist raids into Israel and Egyptian-sponsored Fedayeen raids from Gaza and so forth. This is where the Israeli army adopts the policy of reprisals. You get to 56, we have the Sinai campaign. Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, and of course that gets everybody in the act. The terrorist bases in Gaza are dismantled. U.S. Soviet pressure forces Israeli withdrawal from the Sinai without a peace treaty. Now get this, Dwight Eisenhower guarantees in 1956 the protection of Israeli shipping. The U.S. gets in the act, and they expel, they make Israel rely on our protection. You can tell what's coming, can't you? In 1964, the PLO was founded in Cairo with the aim of liberating Palestine. I want you to notice the year, it's 64. It's before the Six-Day War. The so-called West Bank territories are theirs at this point. Then what are they after? The total extermination of Israel. They're not after those territories like they are now. They had them in those days. The PLO Charter calls for Israel's destruction. Campaign of terror attacks across Israel's borders, and on it goes. And they adopted the charter claiming all the land once ruled by Britain. They call it Palestine. And they're calling an armed struggle to liberate these lands and destroy Zionism, and get this, and any state founded upon it. And so radical language, of course, becomes a major stumbling block and so on. Let's go to 67. Egypt floods the Sinai with troops and blockades the Israeli shipping in the Red Sea. The American guarantee to protect Israel fails to take effect. I understand that they contacted Washington, and the State Department said they couldn't find the paperwork. Can you imagine? We guaranteed them, and it nothing. If you want to do a background on this, I encourage you to read the book, The Betrayal of the Chosen. It's based on 3 authoritative documents. Joan Peters' classic work called From Time Immemorial, which really tells you well-documented background on the Palestinian situation. Benjamin Netanyahu book, his book in 1993 called A Place Among the Nations. Very readable, very terrific book. And also the other book by Loftus and Manuel, how Western espionage has betrayed Israel. But anyway, let's go on. The Six-Day War, of course, we're all familiar with. Israel defeats the combined forces of Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and Jordan. They capture Sinai and Gaza, Judea, Samaria, the Golan Heights. I don't know why they didn't just annex them all. But anyway, Jewish settlements continue in eastern Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria is established, and so on. 67, we have the UN resolutions. I want to talk about these. You constantly will hear about UN resolutions 242 and 338. One was in 67, one was in 73. These 2 UN Security Council documents were both following Arab-Israeli wars, called for sides to renounce the acquisition of territory by war. Sounds very pious. What they're really saying is Israel won, so you got to give it back. See? I'm going to come back to the UN in a minute, but they also asked for a solution to the Palestinian refugee problem. Why don't they ask the solution from the people who are running the refugee camps? And billions of dollars have been poured into the Palestinian cause, but it all goes into the pockets of the leaders. There's no intention to reduce the squalor in those camps. It's too convenient a political lever. And but the resolutions nevertheless rallied international segment against Israel. So we got this reversal of causality again, and against Israel. So they got the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and Jordan renounced it, by the way. It should be a non-issue. The Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula was given back. And of course the Golan Heights from Syria, and I think that's close to being resolved. But anyway, 73, the Yom Kippur War, Camp David Accord. That was following an initiative by Anwar Sadat. We have Menachem Begin entering into a U.S. brokered talks that led to the return of the Sinai in Egypt, to Egypt, and ultimately a peace treaty. And just as it did before, it's going to result in he's assassinated largely because of Camp David, and the Accord's effort to draw the Palestinians, Jordan, and Syria into talks failed. They tried to make it a beginning of a sing, and it didn't work. In 80 and 81, we have annexation and all kinds of claims. Israel passed 2 key laws in the 1980s. The first named all of Jerusalem, including East Jerusalem and the Old City, which was captured from Jordan back in 67, as Israel's eternal capital. What we should have done when that happened is move our embassy there. We always put our embassy in the capital of the country. Congress told Clinton to do so later, and he refused. The second law they passed annexed the Golan Heights, which was captured from Syria in 1967. Now, these moves by what many people call the right-wing government enraged the Arabs, of course, and made future peace talks more difficult. Whenever the Arabs aren't winning, of course, they're difficult. And Israelis argue these moves are vital to national security and Jewish identity, which you can substantiate pretty well. Most of the world, including the U.S., still maintains its embassies in Tel Aviv, which is an insult. In 1993, we have these weird things called the Oslo Peace Accords. Years of secret contacts between the liberals in Israel and the PLO into a complex formula was agreed on both sides. The PLO was to end its armed struggle in exchange for gradual sovereignty over parts of the West Bank, Gaza Strip. Out of 22 details, they've never fulfilled one of them. The press never mentions that. The larger issues, which is, this whole thing was silly because the larger issues, Jerusalem, statehood, refugees, were all put off until the final status talks. And so what's the impact of this? Of course, we had Rabin and Arafat with their handshake on the White House lawn. But like Sadat, Rabin paid with his life, and the accords proved impossible to implement. See, the fundamental problem is based on a false premise. It's not the size of Israel, it's the issue. Reducing the borders isn't an issue. It's the extermination of Israel that's the issue. The very existence of Israel is the issue here. Then we get to 1994 with the Israel-Jordan peace treaty, and that's the real one. Jordan had previously renounced its claim to the West Bank and East Jerusalem that was lost back in 1967. And having helped the PLO and Israel in the direct talks, Jordan agreed to formalize what had become a de facto peace with Israel. And the treaty caused trouble for King Hussein, whose kingdom has a Palestinian majority. But as the second Arab state to officially recognize Israel, it paved the way for others and helped keep the Oslo talks moving ahead, as if that was good. I'm not sure that's good, but anyway. And then we get to the interim agreement, as it's called, which marked the end of the first phase of the three-phase Oslo process. It set out future Israeli pullouts from the key West Bank towns. It expanded the Palestinian self-rule from Gaza and Jericho to include Nablus, Jenin, and Hebron. It also set the stage for the first Palestinian elections held in 1995. Now, this all bogged down because of the complexities, no surprise, and the pro-Oslo Labour Party lost power to the more skeptical Likud in the interim, and violence in Hebron delayed the city's handover until a special accord could be signed in January of 1997. We get to the Wye River Memorandum. This is again Clinton's efforts to try to have some kind of a legacy, but there were bombing attacks by the Palestinian extremists during 1995 that elections and violence early in the term of the right-wing Prime Minister Netanyahu that virtually shut down the process for over 2 years. The Wye River Memorandum revived it, but Clinton was mediating disputes between the parties, and the impact was that there were all kinds of pledges to resume land handovers, but the Palestinians vowed to step up security measures. But obviously they didn't, and this quickly fell victim to recriminations and so forth, and the process stalled again. And we get the same kind of thing. It just continues, meetings, everything gets talked to, but gets unraveled. And meanwhile, the Israelis are electing Ariel Sharon. Something else is going on during this time, too. Israel was divided, say, roughly 50-50, hawks and doves. There were Israelis that so yearned for peace, they were willing to do anything. It's also about this time, in year 2000, 2001, that Israel is waking up to the reality that's just obvious, that their adversaries don't want peace. It's not a question of yielding, it's a question that they did not want peace. And so there is a painful blessing called the dissolving of your delusions. And Israel went through that in large measure to realize what they're up against. Camp David II really amounted to nothing. It was a final attempt. And Israel actually offered part of East Jerusalem as the Palestinian capital, plus most of the West Bank. The talks failed because Arafat demanded some additional things. He wishes now, I'm sure, that he'd taken it, but he didn't. So anyway, so Barak, of course, that eroded his domestic support, so he resigned and called for fresh elections, and that's when Ariel Sharon rose to the leadership. Taba talks again, negotiators met, but again, there's no real tangible results. And we always plan to meet again and again and again, but there's no basis set for peace. And now we're in the year 2002, and as we talk, we find our own Bush administration offering a Palestinian state with its terms a series of conditions. And I'm very, very concerned about that, but we'll see how it goes. It does prove that terrorism pays. How ironic it is that we're trying to wage a war on terrorism in all over the world except one place. That's in Israel. In Israel, we take one of the most gross murderers in history and give them the Peace Prize. We encourage terrorism by even our policy. Let's shift to the UN. Up till 1990, the UN Security Council had passed 175 resolutions. You can imagine all the different business that comes before the UN. 175 Security Council resolutions. Did you realize that 97 of those were directed against Israel? 55%. You'd think they'd have something else on their mind. The General Assembly, 690 resolutions voted on before 1990. Of those, 429 directed against Israel, 62%. Do you understand why Israel doesn't get excited about having UN inspectors adjudicate what's going on? In those, by the way, there's never been a citation against anybody that's been abusing Israel. The Arabs, all kinds of incidents that go unrecorded, unnoticed. Let's talk about the military. They have a budget of about 12% of their GDP, but they also get $2 billion a year from us. They have about 173,000 active troops, but they have over 400,000 reserves. And tanks, they've got about almost 4,000 U.S.-made M1A1s, but they also have some Israeli Merkavas. Merkava is the Hebrew word for chariot. Aircraft, about 2,000. They have about 1,700 F-16s, and they also have 129 attack choppers, 6,500 naval troops, 4 German-made submarines, and fast missile boats. You know, 3 of those submarines carry 8 cruise missiles, and those cruise missiles are capable of nuclear warheads. By the way, 3 of those submarines, two of the 3 were paid for by the German government as reparations for the German parts that were in the Scud missiles during the Persian Gulf War. Strategic weapons, some estimates have them about 300 nuclear warheads and over 200 multiple rocket launchers. They have about 1,300 surface-to-air missiles with about 1,000-kilometer range. They have chemical, biological, and by the way, they have neutron bomb capabilities. Neutron bomb capability. That's something I don't think even we have, to the best of my awareness. Here's some comparative strengths. We've gone through Iraq, Iran, Syria, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan. Together they add up to almost 4 million troops, 14,000 tanks, almost 6,000 aircraft. Israel has about 600,000 troops and under 4,000 tanks and under 2,000 aircraft, which means that Israel is only outnumbered by about 6 to 1, which isn't really enough. You know, if you study the book of Judges, you know that they had 32,000 troops to face 135,000. You know, and God whittled it down until apparently the odds that God's more comfortable with is about 14 to 1. And so, see, this allows them still, if they win, to take credit for it. In the book of Judges, God sets up Gideon, so there's no way they can do anything but acknowledge that God gave them the victory. So it's kind of interesting. They have Israel's outnumbered 6 to 1 in troops and 4 to 1 in aircraft. 4 to 1 in tanks and 3 to 1 in aircraft in rough terms. So, but that all is eclipsed, of course, by the area of nuclear weapons. I'd like you to name this country just as a little exercise. I'm going to put a country on the board. 700,000 regular active duty personnel, 300,000 reserve troops, 8 standing Army divisions, 20 Air Force and Navy wings, a couple hundred strategic bombers, a couple of thousand combat aircraft, 13 strategic ballistic missile submarines, which involve 3,000 nuclear warheads and over 200 missiles. In addition to all that, 500 ICBMs with almost 2,000 warheads, 4 aircraft carriers, 121 surface combat ships, submarines, and all the supporting activities. The question is, what country have I just profiled? Russia? No. No, not Russia. China? Nope, not China. Great Britain? France? No. United States? No, 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 no. See, the problem is this country no longer exists. It's vanished. You see, these are the American military forces that have disappeared since the 1992 election of Bill Clinton and Al Gore. I thought I'd throw that in here just so you could sleep well, America. Now, obviously, our current administration is trying to repair this damage, but like many things, it's like trying to get toothpaste back into the tube. There are things called heritage. There's things called careers. There's things called professionalism. There's a lot of things you can't repair quickly. It'll take a long time. And so our defense establishment is, in my opinion, in some jeopardy. And when we were against the Persian Gulf War, we had 6 months to position our troops, and we were going against a country with the economy of Kentucky. When we went against Afghanistan, you're already bombing a place that had been already bombed into 1,000 years ago. When you go against Iraq or Iran or some of these other guys, you're going against high-tech, well-resourced people. It's a different ballgame. Well, what's coming? Next question is, okay, what's coming? Sure. Well, we're going to talk about the Magog invasion, Armageddon, the refuge in Edom, and the ultimate monarchy which will be established. Well, in Ezekiel 38 and 39, we have a passage that almost anybody interested in prophecy is well acquainted with, in which a group called Magog, along with allies, Gomer, Meshech, and Tubal, Togarmah, and so forth, Persia, Put, and Libya, Cush, they all go against Israel. And it's famous because it's the occasion that God uses to intervene and quell this ill-fated invasion. It's interesting because there's two people mentioned that are not part of the invading force, Sheba and Dedan. And it's interesting how Saudi Arabia is maybe behind the scenes with financing, but is not a player up front. It's interesting how that's written 2,500 years. Anyway, we'll see what happens here. We have the details of this, of course, in our briefing packages and other materials. One of the questions comes, where does the Magog invasion take place? If we look at the classical model of the 7th week of Daniel, which is defined by a covenant being enforced, and of course it's divided into two by this event called the Abomination of Desolation. The last half, from that period to the end of that 7-year period, is definitively defined by Lord Jesus Christ as the Great Tribulation. We know there's a rebuilt temple, of course, standing by the time you get to the middle of that 7-year period. Where it starts, we don't know, but we know it's there to be desecrated by the middle of that 7-year period. That 7-year period is ended by the famed Battle of Armageddon, of course, and which is, of course, itself interrupted by the second coming of Jesus Christ and establishment of his kingdom on the earth. There are many competent Bible teachers that place the Magog invasion as part of that Armageddon scenario. Hal Lindsey, Dave Hunt, and there's others that certainly are competent observers and very knowledgeable about end-time prophecy. However, there are some of us that have a slightly different view. For a number of technical reasons, Grant Jeffries, myself, Chuck Smith, a number of others, believe that the Magog invasion occurs probably before the 70th week even starts, for some technical reasons that we don't have to debate here. We'll just watch and see. What we all do agree with is that it occurs after the rapture of the church, but before the 70th week. There's an interval in there somewhere. But let's get to the big one. The main event, Armageddon itself, from Revelation 16:16. Speaking of God, he says, he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue, Armageddon. Har-Mageddon is, in effect, idiomatic for the Mount Megiddo, which is a tell, very prominent tell. It's very conspicuous in Israel. If you go, that's become an idiom in our language to be sort of a final climactic battle as an idiom. We often forget it's a real place. This is going to actually happen at a particular time. If you go to the planet Earth and zero in on the Middle East, and you come to a place called Israel, up just south east of Haifa, there's a place called Megiddo. It's there, and it is on the west side of a valley, a very prominent valley, the Valley of Jezreel. Across the valley is Nazareth. If you look across that valley in the hills, you see Nazareth. If you're in Nazareth, you can look across this valley and see, among other things, Megiddo and Gilboa and a lot of others. Now, this Valley of Jezreel is the staging area for the real target, which is Jerusalem. If you read Zechariah and the other prophets, you realize that the real campaign here is against Jerusalem. Megiddo, in the valley of there by Megiddo, is to the Jerusalem what England was to the Normandy invasion. It's the collecting point, the launching point, if you will. Now, the scenario of what really happens, of course, is detailed in Daniel 11, the final verses of that chapter. It's triggered, the whole engagement seems to be triggered by the kings of the south. It's responded to this super leadership that are called throughout that chapter the king of the north. And he's overpowering the whole scene until he trembles because the kings of the east come in across the river Euphrates and into the action. And so Now, we know while these troops are going against Jerusalem, in accordance with Jesus' instruction, when the abomination of desolation is presented as a major political event, the faithful flee. Jesus says, then let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains. And they do. Among other places, they go to Petra, which is a Basra, a sheepfold, classic one. And it is there that Jesus makes his first appearance, apparently, because they will acknowledge their offense. Their prayer is detailed in Hosea 6. When you get to Isaiah 63, it says, who is this that cometh from Edom with dyed garments from Basra, that is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength? I that speak in righteousness, mighty to save, and in mercy. It's obviously Jesus Christ. And he's covered with red. When you see him in Revelation 19, his vesture is dipped in what? Blood. Whose blood? The blood of his enemies. So he redeems the faithful there, and then goes to the Mount of Olives for his triumphal. His feet shall stand on that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west. And very exciting stuff. You remember, now let's remind you that when we had all the world empires profiled in Daniel's dream, that rock, that stone cut without hands, wiped out those empires, all of them, and became a mountain, that is its own empire. And remember, it's not a local thing, it's global. The mountain filled the whole earth. I think even Israel today does not realize what the real war is and what's really going on here. It's all summarized for you in Psalm 2. And when you get home tonight, you might read Psalm 2 and take a scratch pad, write it out, and figure out who's saying what to whom. And you'll discover it's a trialogue between the members of the Trinity. And it opens with, why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet have I set my king up on my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord hath said unto me, thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. Ask of me, and I will give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. You notice this isn't a Jewish thing alone. That's where it's being ruled from. It's the heathen. It's the whole world. This is the Old Testament. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron, and thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Be wise now, therefore, O you kings. Be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and ye perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. At this point, I'd like to change subjects by reviewing the empires from another perspective. There is a view of world prophecy that is not widely held, but probably bears re-examination. And that's the return of Nimrod, the original world dictator. You know, when we started this series, we took a look at the earliest empires from the Fertile Crescent, Egypt, Assyria, Babylonia. And of course, Daniel gives us a profile in advance of the empires from Babylon on. The Babylonian Empire, the city of Babylon, becomes prominent in both the Old and New Testament passages. Babylon was conquered by the Persians, and the Persians were in turn conquered by the Greeks. And the Greek Empire actually breaks up under Alexander. You know, in Daniel chapter 11, we have the handover from the Persian Empire to the Greek Empire. The first couple of verses deals with those successors to Cyrus. You remember Cyrus? He conquered Babylon in Daniel 5. He had a letter written to him 150 years before he was born in Isaiah 45. He's succeeded by Cambyses, Artaxerxes, Darius.
And then Xerxes I, who is the king that is prominent in the book of Esther. He's also the king that conducts a disastrous campaign against the Greeks and really provides the motivation for Alexander 150 years later to take over the Persians. Xerxes is followed by Artaxerxes Longimanus, and he's famous, of course, to us because he gave the decree to rebuild Jerusalem that triggers the 70 weeks of Daniel. But that brings us to Alexander the Great, the close of the Persian Empire and the beginning of what we call the Greek Empire. But when Alexander dies, the empire gets divided among his 4 generals. Cassander takes Macedonia and Greece, Lysimachus, Asia Minor and Thrace, and Syria and Babylon go to Seleucus, and Egypt, Arabia, and Israel go to Ptolemy. It's Seleucus and Ptolemy that become key to our investigation. And they are prominent in Daniel chapter 11, and they are key to understanding the prophecies having to do with the Antichrist. When the empire divided, of course, Cassander and Lysimachus take places that aren't prominent in our narrative. Seleucus takes the lion's share, Ptolemy, of course, Egypt. But the dynasties that succeed from these 2 leaders war for several centuries, Israel, of course, being caught between them as a buffer state. In Daniel chapter 11, from verse 5 through 35, we have written in advance the careers of the leaders in both of these series. The Ptolemies, from Ptolemy I right on through to Ptolemy VI, and from Seleucus all the way through to a climactic one called Antiochus Epiphanes. And what's so fascinating, I encourage you to really study these details in Daniel 11 with some good encyclopedias, and you'll be startled to realize that the careers of these leaders are written well in advance. They're so detailed, so clear, that cynics and skeptics have tried to late date Daniel. But fortunately, it is one of the best documented books in the Bible, and furthermore, it was translated into Greek 3 centuries before Christ's ministry. But the thing that's relevant to our inquiry here is that following Antiochus Epiphanes, who's clearly presented as a type of this final world leader, we continue to have, for the rest of the chapter, the next 10 verses, detailed prophecies about the Antichrist that are expressed in terms as a successor, as a king of the north. Now, as we stand back from all of this, we realize that history consists of 7 super kingdoms of Satan. In Revelation 12:3, it says, "There appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads." And of course, as we look at the parade of empires, we realize that there are 7 of them: Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and then Rome in a second phase. These last empires, which I'll call Daniel's 4+1, are of course familiar to us because when Daniel wrote during the Babylonian captivity, he detailed Nebuchadnezzar's dream and also a series of visions that he had and lays out that history in advance. Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome, and then Rome in 2 phases. So there's really 4 empires, but the last one comes in 2 phases. And I think most scholars recognize that Rome, and what I'll call Rome II, or Rome Revisited, is really expressed in the same idioms in Daniel's prophecies, in Daniel 2 and 7 and so on. And this is also picked up in Revelation 13, 17, and so on. Now, there is a verse in Revelation 17 that constantly puzzles us. I've studied this for many decades. I've searched all the commentators, and none of them really make clear what the 10th verse of Revelation 17 says. John tells us, "And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space." Well, when you stand back from these empires, it's pretty clear. The 5 that are fallen, when John is writing, of course, is Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and Greece, because he's writing during the Roman period. He says 1 is, and that of course, is Rome itself. And the other is not yet come. And that, of course, is Rome II, as I'll call it here, characterized by these famous 10 horns, which of course are detailed in Daniel 2 and 7, Revelation 13 and 17, and so on. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. All well and good, but the next verse in chapter 17 is puzzling. "And the beast that was and is not even he is the eighth. But he is of the seven, and goeth into perdition. Well, which of these, obviously this is referring to what I'll call the 11th horn. We all know about the 10 horns, but there's a little horn in Daniel 7, Daniel 8 that comes up and takes over. So the 11th horn is a reasonable title for this coming world leader. But this is the one that was and is not. Now he's the eighth. Clearly he's the eighth in the sense of these leaderships here. And yet he is of the seven, which means in some sense he is from this list of seven. But he was that which was and is not. Which of these seven existed but doesn't exist today? Well, clearly, Egypt, Babylon, Persia, and Greece, and Rome all have vestiges present in our horizon. There's one that's mysteriously absent from archaeological history as well as secular history, and that's namely Assyria. I'd like to explore this a little further because I think it's been overlooked. You notice when the rise of Rome occurs, they conquered Greece in 146 BC, Lysimachus' kingdom in 133 BC, then Seleucus' kingdom in 64 BC, and finally Egypt in 31 BC, Ptolemy's kingdom. So little by little, Rome absorbs what previously was Alexander's empire. They all disappear, in effect, before the birth of Christ, but all of us fall into the trap when we think of the Roman Empire of confining our horizon to the western leg of it. The eastern leg of the Roman Empire endured for 1,000 years more after the western leg fell. We call it the Byzantine Empire, but that's our label. It's really the vestige of the Roman Empire. And it consists of nations that we often don't think of as Roman, especially Seleucus' kingdom. Now, it's interesting, in recent history, each of these elements have reemerged. In 1906, Iran reemerges. In 1921, Afghanistan gets their independence. In 1922, Egypt and Iraq. 24, Turkey, and Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and finally, of course, Pakistan and Israel. Now, it's interesting. Egypt, of course, was Ptolemy's turf in those days, way back. The rest of these, with the exception of Iran, the rest of these are Seleucus. Actually, Turkey is Seleucus and Lysimachus together. But notice that all the elements of Seleucus and Ptolemy have resurfaced in our modern history. And it's interesting that two of these, Iraq and Syria, constitute what used to be called, prior to the Babylonian Empire, Assyria. Very, very unique, distinctive culture, and about which the Bible has much to say. In fact, it's interesting to realize that in Isaiah 10 and Micah 5, what the person we call the Antichrist is called the Assyrian. I think we need to really focus on this guy. When you get to Micah, there's an interesting passage. It says, "This one shall be the peace," speaking, of course, of the Messiah, "when the Assyrian shall come into our land, and when he shall tread in our palaces, then shall we rise up against him 7 shepherds and 8 principal men." Could it be the 7 angels pouring out wrath? Could it be the Messiah coming? "And they shall waste the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod, and the entrances thereof. Thus shall he deliver us from the Assyrian, when he cometh into our land, when he treadeth within our borders." Now, some people will say that this occurred in history, except you may recall when the Assyrians, while they did capture the northern part of the kingdom, when they tried to get Jerusalem, Sennacherib was confronted with an angel that slaughtered 185,000 of his troops that night, and he went back and never tried again. So they never did. Assyria did not enter Jerusalem and the area of Judah. So we need to review this some more. So I encourage you, as you on the one hand gain a handle on the Middle East, I do encourage you to set aside your presuppositions and search the scriptures to see what they tell you about our emerging horizon. But having said all this, now I would like to talk about the ultimate king that's coming. The ultimate monarchy started with David. It's about to be established in the planet Earth. Let me tell you about this king. He's, of course, the king of the Jews. He's a racial king. He's Jewish. He's the king of the Jews. He's a national king. He is the king of Israel. Make no mistake. But he's also the king of all the ages, the king of heaven, the king of glory, and the king of kings, and the Lord of lords. And the question is not about the Middle East or Pakistan or nuclear weapons. The question is, do you know him? Do you really know him? He was a prophet before Moses, a priest after Melchizedek, a champion like Joshua, an offering in the place of Isaac, a king from the line of David, a wise counselor above Solomon.
He was beloved, rejected, an exalted son like Joseph, and yet far more. The heavens declare his glory, and the firmament shows his handiwork. He who is, who was, and always will be, the first and the last, the Alpha and the Omega, the Aleph and the Tau, the A and the Z. He's the first fruits of them that slept. He's the Ego Eimi, the Ichach Asher Ichach, the I am that I am. Yes, he's the voice of the burning bush. He was the captain of the Lord's host. He was the captain, the conqueror of Jericho. He's enduringly strong, entirely sincere, eternally steadfast. He's immortally graceful, imperially powerful, impartially merciful. In him dwells the fullness of the Godhead bodily, the very God of very God. He is our kinsman redeemer, but he's also our avenger of blood. He's our city of refuge. He's our performing high priest, our personal prophet, our reigning king. He's the loftiest idea in literature. He's the highest personality in philosophy. He's the fundamental doctrine of theology. He's the supreme problem in higher criticism. He's the miracle of the ages. He's the superlative of everything good. You and I are the beneficiaries of a love letter that was written in blood on a wooden cross that was erected in Judea some 2,000 years ago. They say he was crucified on a cross of wood, yet he made the hill on which it stood. By him were all things made that were made. Without him was not anything made that was made. And by him are all things held together. What held him to that cross? It wasn't the nails. He was the creator of the universe. At any time he could have said, enough already, I'm out of here. What held him to that cross? His love for you and me. He was born of a woman so that we could be born of God. He humbled himself so that we could be lifted up. He became a servant so that we could be joint heirs with him. He suffered rejection so that we could become his friends. He denied himself so that we could freely receive all things. He gave himself so that he could bless us in every way. He's available to the tempted and tried. He blesses the young. He cleanses the lepers. He defends the feeble. He delivers the captives. He discharges the debtors. He forgives the sinners. He franchises the meek. He guards the besieged. He heals the sick. He provides strength to the weak. He regards the aged. He rewards the diligent. He serves the unfortunate. He sympathizes and he saves. His offices are manifold. His reign is righteous. His promises are sure. His goodness is limitless. His light is matchless. His grace is sufficient. His love never changes. His mercy is everlasting. His word is enough. His yoke is easy and his burden is light. I wish I could describe him to you. He's indescribable. He's incomprehensible. He's irresistible. He's invincible. The heaven of heavens cannot contain him. Man cannot explain him. The Pharisees couldn't stand him, but soon learned they couldn't stop him. Pilate, the personal representative of the ruler of the world, couldn't find fault with him. The witnesses couldn't agree against him. Herod couldn't kill him. Death couldn't handle him. The grave couldn't hold him. He has always been and always will be. He had no predecessor and he'll have no successor. You can't impeach him and he ain't going to resign. His name is above every name, that at the name of Yeshua, every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. His is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Amen. Right? You betcha. You betcha. Thank you. Well, as we close, I'd like to leave you with a challenge. And if you accept what I'm about to say, you flunk the course. I want you to take what I'm about to say with the most extreme skepticism you can muster. I'm going to say something I believe that I want you to challenge. I believe we are being plunged into a period of time about which the Bible says more than it does about any other period of time in history, including the time that Jesus walked the shores of Galilee or climbed the mountains of Judea. That's a preposterous statement. But I believe you and I are being plunged into a period of time about which the Bible says more than it does about the gospel period. Now, how do you check that out? You got to do two things. You got to find out what the Bible says about these things. Not what Chuck Missler or whoever said, what the Bible says about these things. The second part you've got to do, used to be hard, it's not hard today with the internet and the resources available. Find out what's going on. You won't on the 10 o'clock news. You got to do some homework. To help you, we monitor on our website 10 strategic trends. We have briefings on these, backgrounders on each one of these, but we watch these 10 trends. The proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, the rise of Islam, the struggle for Jerusalem, the Magog invasion, the rise of the European superstate, the rise of China, biotech and global pestilence, ecumenical religion, the move towards a global government, and of course the American challenge. Each one of these has a scriptural footing. Each one of these is a natural area to collect intelligence about today's world, that it will affect the world, our nation, our community, ourselves, our families. What's your action plan then? If you've listened to this thing and you say, gee, that was interesting, go home without something changed, you've wasted your time. What do? First of all, guard your reactions. There's going to be a lot of turmoil. God says, doesn't tell you to witness, it says be a witness. That's your challenge. One of the things you need to do is we all need to repair our illiteracy. It's shocking to realize how many Christians do not know their Bible. Let's repair our biblical illiteracy. Let's repair our illiteracy about the biggest challenge to the West, not just Israel, but to Christianity too. That's Islam. Find out the realities. All of that should realign our personal priorities. And I don't mean just checkbooks and dollars. I'm talking about your time. Where are you spending your time? And remember your heavy artillery in this warfare. It's prayer. You can participate in the trauma that's going on throughout the world to Christians and Jews. And you can do so from your bedroom. Your heavy artillery is prayer. And use it. It's time to get serious about our faith. Well, now, how can we help you? We like to try to help you. We have some paths. We have a product that's become one of the hottest things we've ever done. It's called Learn the Bible in 24 Hours. That rather audacious title is you can't learn everything about the Bible in 24 years. But what you can do with 24 one-hour sessions that are accompanied with 1,500 computer-animated diagrams, you can learn from Genesis to Revelation and come away with a comprehension, a strategic grasp of the whole Bible, sufficient to navigate all the way through it, any topic you might have. If you survive that ordeal, then I encourage you to take a look at our expositional commentaries. We have verse-by-verse commentaries on almost every book of the Bible, more than 2/3 of them, the rest coming, little by little, verse by verse, audio. They traditionally have been available on audio tapes with several hundred pages of printed notes. That gets expensive. They're now available on CD-ROM. The audio is an MP3, and the text, the notes are there on PDF files. They're also available in audio tapes and audio CDs still, of course. We also publish what we call briefing packages, 2 tapes plus notes on some topic. And we have over 80 topics, some scientific, some geopolitical, some archaeological, some doctrinal, but basically special studies, special topical studies for your home study group, your family, what have you. But there are other resources. We have a monthly news journal. It tries to highlight the biblical relevance of current events. And the first year we'll give you free. And we're not being generous. We're just adopting the marketing strategy of a narcotics peddler. First year's on us, and we hope you get addicted to it. But we also have an internet site you want to check out. We are really, especially the young people are really website. I apologize if you're internet deprived, but the web is where the action is. You might check out www.khouse.org. No one can pronounce koinonia house, let alone spell it. Everyone calls us K-House. khouse.org. And on that, you'll find these strategic trends I've mentioned monitored weekly, and it's all free, by the way. There's also e-news. If you will give us your email address, we will send you every week a one-page summary of what's happening this week that's biblically relevant, and it'll list the links on the web as to who's following it competently. Many of these are secular links, but the point is each of those trends, when something happens, we'll try to highlight the 4 or 5 key things each week, and a little one-page thing, you'll get an email, and you can follow the links up and stay aware. And it's all free, by the way. Free. I said free, okay? We're also host of the Blue Letter Bible, which has the English, Hebrew, and Greek texts, commentaries, dictionaries, encyclopedias. All of it's word searchable. It's all free. It's an incredible resource. But especially what we're trying to do is encourage you to get into a home study group. There are many of these that are probably sponsored by your church. Many people do them on their own anyway, but we encourage you to meet. In 50 years of Christian study, I've seen most of my growth and most of the growth of people around me occur in the homes. Small groups of 5, 10, 20 people, not more than that, it gets too unwieldy, where there's participation and discussion, verse by verse, exposition. Not on someone's book. Go study the Word of God, verse by verse. Pick a book and go through it, chapter a week. And we'll be glad to help you. If you can find one in your neighborhood, great. If you can't find one, consider prayerfully leading one. We'll help you. Contact us, and we're trying to pull together resources that will make it useful to you. We have a thing we call K-Rations. It's a tape-a-week program. We send you every week a tape. It includes about a 10-minute update on the current geopolitical or scientific or archaeological events that are biblically relevant. Then it follows with a 1 hour, not necessarily related to that, there's a 1 hour verse-by-verse expositional study, and it's chapter by chapter on a book of the Bible. Many people collect those tapes then. They become, in effect, our published commentaries. And we send along with accompanying notes, discussion questions, detailed references, diagrams, all that sort of thing. And some of these, they've traditionally been published in what we call the heirloom edition, leather-bound album, or leatherette-like bound albums. But now they are available on CD-ROM, which are much less expensive. And we're also making available through the Louisiana Baptist University course credit. This will be all the way up to the PhD level. So check it out for us. We're Koinonia House, 1-800-K-House. 1 is the phone number. And the website, of course, is www.khouse.org. God bless you and good hunting.